Hello, and welcome to the Westminster Town Hall Forum. I am Margaret Fox, Associate Pastor for Adult Ministries here at Westminster. Following today's program with Raquel Willis, I'd like to invite you all to join me and Reverend Dr. Megan Gage Finn for a Continuing the Conversation. We'll have a chance to reflect in small groups on what we've heard and what we've learned. That'll be in the recreation room, which is, if you go out these doors, it's opposite Westminster Hall over there. So grab some breads and spreads. That's code name for a special reception we have after the Town Hall Forum. Get some snacks at Breads and Spreads, and then come to the rec room to continue the conversation, to discuss and really kind of internalize what we've learned tonight. There's no need to sign up, just swing by. And now I am excited to introduce our musical offering for the evening. Our forum begins tonight with a performance by Pine and Fire. This self-described working-class queer folk music duo from the North Woods of Minnesota is made up of longtime best friends Joby Adams and Brandy May. Welcome. Together they sing original songs woven with themes of love, escapism, home, and growth. And in 2021, Pine and Fire gained visibility when they made it to the final round of the second annual Gems on VHS, Gems in the Rough songwriting contest. And then again in 2023, they were awarded the Jerome Hill Artist Fellowship in Music. So please join me in welcoming to Westminster, Pine and Fire. Thank you for being here.
Hello. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for having us. We're going to get into it with a song I wrote about growing up on Minnesota's Iron Range and my journey into transness and off of the range. It's called "Them Woods He So Loved," and goes like this. He was born on a cold night by the headwaters and raised by the woods in which he played. The cedars and the pines were always on his mind, but something still felt wrong about that place. He said, I could never be somebody's daughter, and I don't even know my name. He cut his hair off in the night and rode away in the moonlight. Looking back, never crossed his mind. Well, time flew fast, and every passing hour turned into another passing day. As his memories, once fresh, faded into ash and floated down the river with the shame. Now he's going by the name of his grandfather and hoping that nobody knows his face. In any of the towns where he sings, the streets all up and down, hoping to get by another day. For several years now he's been a-wandering and chasing the thrill of feeling free. But every now and then a strong northern wind will come along and knock him off his feet. And with fire on his breath, he'll close his eyes and weep for them woods that he so loved but had to leave. Thanks. Thank you. Next, we're gonna play a song that I wrote called I Dreamt I Was. And at the time,
You dreamt you were what?
I dreamt I was. Many things. I still do. But I wrote this song at a time that I was trying to learn the riff for Elizabeth Cotton's Freight Train. And I was working on it, and the next thing I knew, I was way over here, and Freight Train was over here, and I was writing a new song.
Didn't you write a song around Puff the Magic Dragon once too?
I sure did. It happens a lot. I think I'm doing one thing, and I end up somewhere else. But I'm always happy with where I end up. This is I Dreamt I Was. Dreamt I was on a train that was Arkansas bound, going to see my family in their small Arkansas town. Last time I was there, I was but a wee child, but the dream felt so damn real, I forgot where I was for a while. I was flying down a highway, Wyoming bound. Been just shy of a year since the last time I came around. Stopped to look at the stars, we was all laid out on the ground. But I closed my eyes and when the sun did rise, I was back in my own town. Dreamt I was riding northbound on 53, going to see my parents in the house where it came to be. Every time I'm there, I can't wait to leave, but as soon as I get away, I miss it desperately. Dreamt I was sitting on a front porch with the sun and trees all around. You was there and we had gray hair, I'd finally settled down. When I woke I was somewhere, felt like nowhere at all. Wandering alone in search of a home or some kind of calling. Thank you. No, we're going into another finger picking song. We have more finger picking tonight on the set than usual.
It's a calm night, you know?
It is. It's a really gorgeous space, and the acoustics are incredible in here. We're really grateful to be playing here. We're going to play a song next that I wrote called Give Me Your Word. It's about a friend breakup. It was very painful. Happened a few years ago, but every once in a while I'm still shook by it. Hurt break me again, this is it. I don't mean to get you down, but I am done getting kicked around and losing the love that I thought that I had found. I'm putting myself first from here on out. So give me your word that I won't end up hurt. I have nothing left to give. If you break me again, this is it. It might be time to leave this town and go someplace where I cannot be found. I would change my name and reinvent myself. If only I could leave behind that guilt. So give me your word that I won't end up hurt. I have nothing left to give. If you break me again, this is it. Give me your word that I won't end up hurt. I have nothing left to give. If you break me again, this is it. Thank you. You know, we got in here and we got set up, and I was looking at my guitar while sitting in the pews, and I was like, man, I should have washed it before we came out here tonight. We've been playing a lot of shows this year. This is our full-time job, is making music, and there's a lot of months' worth of sweat built up on this guitar.
Where are we going from here?
Just
Moon
means we're
song?
working. Moon song.
Moon song?
I wrote a song for the moon. I think that it's underappreciated, especially in this city where we're always on the move, always stuff to do. Brandy's got to tune a bit. You know it's authentic folk music when the banjo has to be tuned every other song.
It really is every other song. Yeah.
All right, here's Moon Song. Ah, the moon's lying low, her belly is full. The city don't slow down for nothing. No, it's just go, 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 so I don't leave my home. I'm constantly hiding from something. And I've had the thought a few times that I ought to leave this world behind. But I know it ain't right by the ones in my life. So I sit here and watch the moon shine. And I might be crying tomorrow, myself in her light. Now this house where I reside, no, it ain't really mine. All I own is my words and my time. Most people I see, they're all just like me, with everyone trying to get by. And pictures online, they don't look like real life. All the truth can be so hard to find. So when I don't know what's right and I can't see the light, I go out and watch the moon shine. And I might be crying tomorrow, that ain't what's on my mind. Giving the moon all of my sorrow, bathing myself in her light. Yeah, I'm giving the moon all of my sorrow and bathing myself in her light. Thank you. Just gonna do a real fast time check. All right, where are we going?
Well, are we doing the What I Am? Are
Let's
you giving
go.
that a shot? Or you just want to do Left Behind?
Let's
What are you
go Left
feeling?
Behind. We'll let you sing them.
I'm going to sing a song that Joby wrote for you, because Joby's the songwriter, and I'm just a musician who can sing.
Which means we're a perfect pair. So I wrote this song during a time of self-reflection. I was feeling real bad about myself, and I thought maybe instead of feeling bad, I should write a song. So it's called Left Behind Blues. Fog's hanging heavy over my memory, and I can't feel nothing at all. It's morning again, the grass is all wet, and the air tastes like the last days of fall. The fields are all empty, the birds have all gone. It's time that I start moving on. But I'm here standing still, like I probably always will. 'Cause that's what happens when you can't face your faults. You get left behind with time. You get lost in the back of people's minds.
empty, living behind all these walls, surrounded by noise, can't hear my own voice. It gets lost with the rest in the fog. I get left behind with time. I get lost in the back of people's minds. One day I'll wake up to a half-empty cup and no one to listen to me whine. Fog's hanging heavy over my memory, and I can't feel nothing at all. Thanks.
Thank you all. We have 2 more songs for you tonight. The next one we haven't played out in a real long time.
We haven't played it at all in a long time.
That's true. But hopefully the muscle memory kicks in and it goes all right.
It'll be fine.
And if it doesn't, I think hopefully you're all forgiving people. This is a song I wrote called What I Am. It's a real short and sweet ditty. It says what it needs to in less than 2 minutes.
It's got to warm up the muscle memory quick.
Yeah. Get the capo on right.
Oh, the capo
Don't
helps
want
too.
any buzzing strings. All right. With my hands in the dirt, I bury my hurt, make peace with the places I've been. No, there's nothing out there that I can't find right here, and there's no running from what lies within. I planted my seeds with my hopes and my dreams in the place where I laid down my grief. I'll tend to them until they turn into trees, fruit hanging from branches outreached. And I know that it's not all you hoped I might be. What I am is plenty for me. Thank you.
We appreciate your support.
Honestly, it went better than I expected it might. Well, we've got one more song for you, and it's personally my favorite song I've written. I don't know that it's the best song I've written, but it felt the best to write. It's called Dance on the Ashes. Again, we're Pine and Fire, and if you like what you're hearing tonight, you can find us all over the internet, Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and we're local, so we also play around the Twin Cities and all of Minnesota quite a bit. Yeah. Thank you to Westminster for having us. This has been a pleasure. This next song is Dance on the Ashes.
Who I was yesterday is already gone. And who I am today isn't who I'll be for long. I have been so hurt and I've been strung along. And I have been the one to make things go wrong. I have been the one to make things go wrong. And I have lost some people who I loved and adored over unresolved feelings from what came before. On my end and theirs, and even on yours, we all carry something that we didn't ask for. We all carry something that we didn't ask for. Sometimes I feel so small that I can't get out of bed. And other times I feel like the best that's ever lived. But most of the time I'm somewhere in between. Take my good with the bad and hope that I find peace. Take my good with the bad and hope that I find peace. See, I ain't upset, no, not anymore. 'Cause that's not what living and dying is for. I screamed and I cried, I swore and I yearned. Then I danced on the ashes of the bridges that I burned. I danced on the ashes of the bridges that I burned.
Thank you all. We've been Pine and Fire. It's been a pleasure.
Are we good to unplug? I don't want to hurt people's ears.
Let's see what Keith says. All right.
Go for it.
Good evening and welcome to the Westminster Town Hall Forum. I am Margaret Fox, Associate Pastor for Adult Ministries here at Westminster. I have a couple of announcements for you tonight. Following the program with Raquel Willis, we are going to be having a Continuing the Conversation program. That is going to be in the rec room. Welcome, especially if this is your first time here. We're so glad you're with us either in person or online. And if you're here with us in person, you're welcome to continue the conversation afterwards. We'll gather in small groups to discuss what we've learned and experienced here tonight. That'll be in the rec room, which is right across from Westminster Hall out these doors. And in Westminster Hall, there is going to be a breads and spreads reception, which is not to be missed. Get yourself a snack and then come and join us. No need to sign up, just join us in the rec room to continue the conversation. Westminster Presbyterian Church has been home of the Town Hall Forum since 1980. We are so delighted to be here this evening. I'd like to turn it over to the forum's director and interim moderator, Tane Danger. Tane, welcome.
All right. Hi, everybody. I am so happy to be here. Thank you so much. As mentioned, my name is Tane Danger. This is our final program of 2024, and we are very excited to have Raquel Willis with us, the author of The Risk It Takes to Bloom on Life and Liberation. So, I mentioned this is our final forum of 2024. It takes a lot of people to make the Town Hall Forum happen. And so because it's our last forum, I wanted to take just a moment to thank as many of the people as I can who help make these programs happen as I can at this particular moment. I know that we want to hear our speakers, so I will try and do this quickly, expediently, but it really is important because honestly, for all the people that I'm going to name, these programs wouldn't happen without them. But you can help me just save your applause until the very end when I get through all of these, okay? So here we go. So, all right, first of all, our amazing volunteers who you're seeing in the room, they do everything from ushering you in and collecting your questions to helping take care of our speaker. Our advisory board, many of whom are here tonight, they do leadership and a lot of work on the ground all year round to make the forum happen. Keith Kopatz and Eric Adams do a lot of the technical direction for the Town Hall Forum. They make the live streams happen. Hello, live stream audience. Rodney Allen Schwartz, who is just here moving things back and forth with the band. Jessica Wilson, who's at the desk, along with a lot of the other desk attendants who help with that. And our amazing facilities staff. I know John is right there in the room tonight. Hi, John. Please say thank you to John when you see him because he does a lot to put everything together here. We already met. We met Margaret Fox and Megan Gage Finn and the rest of the Westminster Presbyterian staff. I'm going to say a big one. Mary Marielli is over here. She is the other staff person along with me for the Westminster Town Hall Forum. So that is true. There's only 2 dedicated staff people for the Town Hall Forum, and one of them is not very organized or smart. And so if you think that these things go off pretty well, like Mary has almost everything to do with that. Tom Northenscold, who you can see is taking photos around here. He captures all of our things. And then Doug Knutson, who has been doing portraits of our speakers since 1993. If you haven't before, check out his amazing portraits of all of our speakers that are up on the wall. Our media partners, MinnPost and Sahan Journal. MinnPost, a nonprofit community-supported newsroom, trusted guide to critical issues, challenges, and opportunities facing Minnesota. And Sahan Journal, whose mission is to provide reliable, high-quality journalism for immigrants and communities of color. And, of course, Minnesota Public Radio, who is recording tonight's forum and will broadcast all of the fall town hall forums next week. Finally, thank you to Starla and her amazing team who are going to do breads and spreads after this. And honestly, last one, and I know that this is kind of a catch-all, but it's really true. Thank you to you all, everybody who donates, who shows up, who volunteers, who tells friends about coming to the forum. This, honest to goodness, is a community program that would not happen without all of you who are here, who are watching online, who are listening later. So thank you to everyone that I mentioned, to all of you. And please, can we do a big round of applause for everybody who really makes these things happen? Okay. I did mention this is our last program, and we are being recorded tonight by Minnesota Public Radio. All of the Westminster Town Hall forums from the fall season are going to be broadcast on Minnesota Public Radio next week. So starting December 11th, you'll be able to hear one program each day at noon, starting Monday. One will air each day. This program will actually air a week from today, next Thursday at noon. So we hope that you will tune in for those or any of the ones you missed. Copies of Miss Willis's book will be for sale outside by our booksellers, and she's going to do a signing afterwards. And so we hope that you will stick around for that as well as breads and spreads. Okay, one more really important note before we begin. So we learned just this week of the killing of Savannah Ryan Williams in South Minneapolis. She was a transgender woman who friends have been talking over the course of this week that she was smart and caring and really engaged in her community. And her death is a tragedy, and we take time to mourn this unjust and untimely passing. And we recognize that what happened to her is part of an epidemic of violence against transgender women of color, which is painful. And it's a reminder of why this is important to lift up voices that are calling us to stand up against this kind of hatred and destruction of life. Voices like our speaker tonight. It is also incumbent and important for us to remember that every life, every story is unique. And there's no expectation that any one person speaks on behalf of another person because of their identity or who they are or where they're from. But for right now, just as we go into tonight's program, and I know that this is something that the community is thinking a lot about, I think that it would be very appropriate, and I'd ask you to join me in taking just a moment of silence to remember Savannah Ryan Williams. Thank you. Now, with that, I'd ask you to just take a moment to situate yourself, to take a moment to be ready to listen, to lean in, because tonight we get to hear from someone that I am incredibly grateful is joined us here at the Westminster Town Hall Forum here in Minneapolis tonight, and is going to speak to us and then give us the privilege of letting us ask her some questions. Our speaker this evening at the Westminster Town Hall Forum is Raquel Willis. She is the co-founder of the Transgender Week of Visibility and Action. She has been named to the Forbes 30 Under 30 and Fast Company's inaugural Queer 50. And she has won 2 GLAAD Media Awards. Her writing has been published in Vice, BuzzFeed, and Vogue, among others, as well as several anthologies, including 400 Souls, which is edited by Ibram X. Kendi. Her brand new memoir, just out last month, and which we have here tonight, is The Risk It Takes to Bloom on Life and Liberation. Please help me in doing a generous, warm welcome to the Westminster Town Hall Forum for Raquel Willis.
Wow. Thank you so much, Tane and Tim and all the other folks whose names start with T that made this possible tonight. And of course, thank you to so many of our illustrious guests, including someone I look up to so dearly, Council Member Andrea Jenkins. Yes, history maker and trailblazer. And thank you all to the folks who are in this room physically and the folks who are listening and the folks who are streaming and wherever else folks are tuning in. Before I start, I have to give so much love and gratitude to the communities here in Minneapolis and, of course, in Minnesota across the board, just for being really in ground zero of a lot of our social justice movements, particularly recently, but of course historically. In my work with the movement for Black Lives and LGBTQ+ movement, I've been blessed to organize alongside some of your fearless and fierce leaders, and so I just got to give y'all's 10s across the board, honey. So I wanted to start with a quote from a Black woman writer that I admire so much eternally. And I feel like Black women and Black queer writers have provided us so many sacred texts, particularly in considering Black feminism. It was the fault of the earth, the land, of our town. I even think now that the land of the entire country was hostile to marigolds that year. This soil is bad for certain kinds of flowers. Certain seeds it will not nurture, certain fruit it will not bear. And when the land kills of its own volition, we acquiesce and say the victim had no right to live. That's Toni Morrison from The Bluest Eye. And I think of this metaphor of marigolds and, of course, flowers, because when I was a kid growing up in Augusta, Georgia, if you can't tell from the accent yet, I'm a Southern girl. I was raised as a little boy, and I remember seeing these beautiful magnolias on this tree that reached over the fence in my backyard. It was our neighbor's tree. And I remember plucking off the flowers and loving the velvety, creamy petals, that scent, and of course those waxy hunter green leaves. And then fear struck me because I knew, as someone being raised as a little boy, I wasn't supposed to like flowers. And with that, I felt this sense that I also couldn't be precious, couldn't be pure, didn't deserve softness and affection in those ways. And so when I think about this quote from The Bluest Eye, I think of the marigolds as folks on the margins. And I think of the land as those systems of oppression that often tighten around our roots. And so I think about, of course, Savannah Ryan Williams, who I learned about on my way here, a trans woman who was a victim of intimate partner violence, of anti-trans violence, of patriarchal violence. And I think of how many times we've been here before, right? How many deaths we accrue like tallies on somebody's board. And then I thought about the person who got to that point where they felt like it was okay to take her life. And I'm curious about the why. Why do we get to that point where we have someone who thinks it's okay to take the life of one of our precious marigolds? And I'm often the kind of person who, of course, believes in personal accountability, but I think we also have to talk about cultural accountability, and we also have to talk about complicity. And so I think of the culture that produces people that think that marigolds shouldn't exist, that people on the margin shouldn't exist. And I think of this culture that is so lacking in empathy, of cisgender men who are so afraid of their identities, maybe their sexuality, their desires being questioned, that the only solution they have, the only relief or reprieve that they have, is to kill someone else. And then I think of tragedy. I know we all know what tragedy feels like. We all, again, have those tallies. We can say so many names, right? Of course, we can say Savannah's name. We can say Dominique Remy-Fells. We can say China Gibson. We can say Elon Nettles, Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown, Sandra Bland, of course, George Floyd, O'Shea Sibley, and so many more. And I'm interested in how we move from the pit that tragedy brings us to into a space of transformation. And that's what blooming means to me. So, back in the 90s and the 2000s, I absorbed this idea as a Black trans woman from media, whether it was scenes on sketch comedy shows that depicted queerness as some kind of disease, or it was in the church. I was raised Catholic, so, beside that guilt that exists, I also was living in a time where I was constantly hearing from traveling priests about the sanctity of certain unions over others. And this idea that if I entered a union in the future with a partner, it wouldn't be valid. And in fact, it would be damning. I absorbed the idea that I shouldn't exist from peers who claimed my femininity, my otherness was a scarlet letter. And I internalized this feeling of being damned, disowned, dehumanized, unlovable. And I was a seed unnurtured in many ways. I very well was supposed to believe that someone like me didn't deserve to bloom. But it took tragedy to knock me out of that idea. When I was 19, my late father passed. It was unexpected. He had a stroke. And his death represented not only the death of someone I loved, but of the expectations that he carried. Because my father was very traditional. He was the kind of dude with the gruff voice, and he'd tell me to straighten up and speak a certain way and all of these different things. He had these trappings of a traditional Southern Black masculinity. And I loved my father dearly. We had a beautiful family, and also those expectations were so suffocating. And so when I lost him and I started to experience the mourning process, I also learned about the brevity of life, the fact that even in those somewhat short 19 years now, I have been trying to live my life on his own terms and not on my own terms. And I learned that there would be absolutely no chance of me blooming if I kept holding on to this belief that if I couldn't be like my peers, if I couldn't be quote unquote normal, if I couldn't be like the other seeds who were primed for blooming, that my life wouldn't amount to much. Thanks to community, I embraced my transness, my womanhood, and then, of course, later on when I started doing more movement work, my Blackness. And it was that love that nurtured me. But all of this, the hardships and the things that brought me hope, were fertilizer. And so I want to offer this community that, of course, just lost someone very cherished. I want to offer communities across this country who are constantly dealing with all different types of violence, whether it's state violence or other types of violence. I want to think about the communities globally that, of course, are watching the genocides happening the world over, and of course, of our Palestinian fam. And I want to offer the folks who are having their trauma weaponized against other groups on the margins, this idea that tragedy and these moments can be fertilization for transformation. So I think about what we share. Beyond the tragedy, we can also share values. We can share values around bodily autonomy, around the fact that we all deserve to chart our own destinies without judgment, without discrimination, without violence. We can share the freedom of self-expression, and we can share self-determination. And when I consider the hell of a year that we have ahead, particularly here in the United States, 2024, I don't have to tell you how much is going to be coming towards folks on the margins. We have to remember how much we share in this human experience. So bodily autonomy isn't just about one person's experience or one group's experience. It's about trans folks and non-binary folks having access to the health care that we deserve. It's about folks having access to reproductive justice and abortion access whenever they need it. Self-determination is about our young people being able to say who they are and be believed in schools and every space that they enter. And self-expression. It's about none of these drag bans that we continue to see. It's about all of us being able to access the histories and the experiences of folks on the margins. None of these curriculum bans. And it's about all of us having the potential to live full lives, to bloom into the marigolds that we all deserve to be. So we have to understand that our destinies are intertwined. I might have lifted that from Audre Lorde a little bit. We also have to understand that none of our lives are disposable. And we have to understand that we deserve the opportunity to come to that day when the risk to remain tight in a bud is more painful than the risk it takes to bloom. So I'm gonna ask y'all to do some labor for a second. Are y'all ready? Yes? I know we're in a church, and can I also just break for a second and say, I grew up Catholic with a capital C, if it can be more capital than it already is. And my parents had us sitting in the front row every Sunday. I felt the pastor spit, the priest spit on my face. I'll consider it a second baptism. So it is wild to be speaking from a pulpit today, and I'm praying I don't get struck down by anything. But I trust that if we all join in this moment and create our own chorus, that I'll be okay. So thank you. So can I ask you to repeat after me? Yes? Okay. So this is going to be to Savannah Ryan Williams, but it's gonna also be to all of the folks that we've lost, folks you've lost personally, folks that we share collectively that we lost. I will carry your name on my tongue and your legacy on my shoulders. I will imagine the world you deserved. I will fight to make that world a reality. Okay, y'all are warming up. But y'all sound like a Catholic congregation. And I want y'all to sound like something else. I will carry your name on my tongue and your legacy on my shoulders. I will imagine the world you deserved. I will fight to make that world a reality. Okay, all right, thank you. So in closing, all of this bloom action I've been throwing your way, I want you to take away, again, this idea that all of these moments, the hard ones, the hopeful ones, are fertilizer. And even though it feels difficult right now for a lot of folks, what gives me hope is knowing that there are ancestors and transcestors who paved ways with so much less than we have now. What gives me hope is that we have leaders in our communities, organizers, and so many others who are drafting plans for our folks to become more liberated. And what gives me hope is remembering that I always have a duty in the Garden of Liberation. And that duty is to leave the soil richer for the seeds to come. Thank you.
We'll trade spots for a minute here. I'm just gonna do this. Raquel Willis. Oh man, fantastic. What a fine. Thank you all so much. That phenomenal. So thank you all so much. Once again, my name is Tane Danger. This is the Westminster Town Hall Forum, coming to you from Westminster Presbyterian Church in downtown Minneapolis. We are speaking this evening with Raquel Willis, the author of the new book, The Risk It Takes to Bloom. We're moving into the portion of the program where we're going to open it up for audience questions from you all. So if you're here in the sanctuary, you have got a program and there are little cards in your program. Please use those to write down your question now, and you can hold it up and our fantastic ushers will gather those, collect those, and bring them to the front. If you are watching the live stream, please type your questions into the chat, and I will try and gather as many of those as I can as well and bring those to Ms. Willis in this part of the program. So as you all are doing that, you're writing down your questions, I'm going to just, forgive me, it's part of my job, I'm going to just make a quick pitch for supporting the Town Hall Forum. You all have heard me say before, like, these programs only happen because the community supports it. This is a truly grassroots organization, something that was built more than 40 years ago by just individuals who came together, who said that Minneapolis should have a space to lift up ethical voices addressing the issues of the day. And that is exactly what we have done for 43 years. Tonight is a beautiful example of that. But in that entire time, it has never been that there is one big underwriter or donor. It's not something where we charge money for tickets. It is free and open to all. And that has always meant that we have depended on you all, the community, to help make this happen. So in this, it is a season of giving, and it's the year end, which is a really important time for us. We've got a goal of trying to raise $60,000 by the end of December. And I know it sounds like a lot, but the good news is our amazing advisory board and the Mortensen companies have come together to do the first half of that. So $30,000 match to start our year-end fundraising campaign, which does mean that the rest of us have to help raise the other $30,000. So that's what we're trying to do. More good news, we've already raised approximately $12,000 of that. People have been generous and chipped in and helped make this thing happen. But I would just ask, as you are thinking about year end, and a lot of people are generous and give at this time of the year, think about what these programs mean. both for you, like for being able to be here and hear these amazing folks come and speak, but for our community to have this here month after month, have these folks come in and talk about things that really matter and then be entirely accessible and open, here to attend in person, to watch via live stream, to hear later on the radio. Think about what that means to you, what that value is for you, and think about if you can make a gift before the end of the year to support the Town Hall Forum. There's envelopes in your programs if you're here. There's also a QR code on the back of your program. We're trying to make this as easy as possible for you all. If you're watching online, you can go to westminsterforum.org/donate and make a gift there. And honest to goodness, I swear, every single gift really matters. And no gift is too small or too large, but no gift is too small. And it really does matter to us. So thank you for everyone who makes this happen. I mentioned this at the top of the program, but one more time, a thank you to our media co-sponsors. Minnesota Public Radio is broadcasting all of the town hall forums from this fall on the air next week. So tune in, tell your friends to tune in to Minnesota Public Radio, NPR News, Monday through Thursday, every day at noon to hear all 4 of our talks in their entirety. You can also always listen to our podcast. If for some reason you miss one of the broadcasts, just search Westminster Town Hall Forum wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks as well to our other media co-sponsors, MinPost, a nonprofit community-supported newsroom and a trusted guide to the critical issues, challenges, and opportunities facing Minnesota. You can receive their free coverage at minpost.com/newsletters. And Sahan Journal, I know there's somebody here from Sahan Journal tonight who they're outside in the lobby. Go say hello to them after the program. They provide coverage of Minnesota, focusing on immigrant and communities of color. Learn more and see their work at sahanjournal.com. So I mentioned Ms. Willis is going to be signing copies of her books, which are for sale from Next Chapter Books, a great bookstore in St. Paul, immediately after the program. There's also breads and spreads, and we heard about continuing the conversation. So, long story short, don't go anywhere. Hang out after this, because there's lots more to be in community and learn from each other in. So, with that, I think it's about time. Ms. Willis, if you're ready, we'll welcome you back up to the podium, and I will start bringing you the questions from the audience. All right, we'll switch places. Here we go. All right. Thank you. Okay, well, I'm going to just go straight to the reader or audience question. Very first one on top of my list here. It says, what are you reading right now that inspires you in your mission and work?
I am reading a book called People Collide by Isle McElroy. It's fiction. So that is cool. I mean, honestly, I had to be on a bit of a reading detox to get through writing this book.
I know.
Because I didn't want to absorb too much, but.
Can we talk about the book for just the book is phenomenal. I'm gonna do a really hard plug because it's a great book, and I honestly think that there is probably an element where the book will be surprising in the way for folks that it contains multitudes. There's so much in this book.
It's thick. It's a thick book. There's
joy, there's sorrow, there's humor, there's family, there's work, there's love, there's all these different aspects to it. I am wondering, you had a career as a journalist before, but what was it like going into this process in particular of trying to put all of that into this one thing?
Okay. Well, a couple things. So being trained as a journalist, especially like 12 years ago at the University of Georgia, shout out to Georgia, you of course absorb this idea that you're supposed to be quote unquote objective, right? And that often means you're supposed to be as unbiased as possible. And we know that we are in a church right now. We know that is kind of an impossible thing to do. And actually what I've learned, and a lot of this came from my work and with other folks in the movement for Black Lives, is that actually to not be clear about the fact that I have a freaking agenda is to feed into these hegemonic white supremacist, cis heteropatriarchal narratives that exist, right? So I do have an agenda. So this gave me a chance to be clear about that, of course. But it also gave me a chance to heal with family, with partners, and other folks, because I really had to process emotionally a lot of things to get it on the page. So yeah.
So I'll just ask one follow-up to that. There is a lot about your family in this book, and it's a journey with your family, as I think it is for most of us, right? Like, I'm wondering if there are aspects to what you have learned, having a journey with your family that might be valuable for all of us to think about, in that it takes work and it takes time, and you're in a different place with your family now than you were 5-10 years ago, and what do we learn from that?
So one of the things in the book that I talk about is when I came out to my dad as gay in high school. We had a couple coming outs, which I know my trans fam understands. But with that experience, he did not respond so well initially. And also, my brother didn't respond well. I mean, we got to work on men. It's like particularly cis het men in our society. Just saying. But with that, I wasn't able to come to the kind of evolution that I have with the rest of my family with my dad, because obviously he passed away. So that's something I'm going to always carry with me. But I think what I learned most was grace and the importance of that quality, that I needed to be able to give folks the opportunity to evolve and not just write them off. And when I get asked the question of how do you deal with difficult family, I start with that, but I also want to be clear that sometimes people just don't have the range to hang. And we have to figure out how to make those decisions around our boundaries. And that might mean somebody might not be in your life in the way that they used to be if they can't fully accept your truth. And then I think the other beautiful thing about queer and trans community is that we get chosen family, y'all. So we don't have to think about this as a situation of lack or a void, because there are other folks out there that can be in that space that maybe some of those people once were.
There's a related question here. It's from a student, and they ask, when the pain seemed so hard, how would you find a way to push through for yourself?
Writing became my release. So that's why I think self-expression is so key, and for us to figure out what our outlets are. I was able to write the things that I didn't feel like I could say to folks at the time that certain incidents happened. And then, trauma and all that, of course, I mean, you have to have a lot of trauma to write a memoir, I guess. But I think the self-expression part is necessary. I think finding folks that you can communicate with and confide in is important. And again, that might not be your origin family. That might be other folks. So yeah.
There's a question here about what policy aspects you feel like are happening that we should pay attention to. I mean, probably a lot of folks here in the room or listening will know Minnesota passed a lot of legislation this year supporting trans rights. And so there's definitely things happening here in Minnesota, but you have a very national view, probably, of both good things happening and not good things happening. And I'm curious what things you feel like really should be the ones folks are tuning into and paying attention to.
Well, what's always important to me is how we keep people safe and alive. I think that that's one of the biggest missteps, particularly in LGBTQ plus movement, is that for decades there wasn't enough prioritizing of the safety of folks on the margins in particular. So that's why all of our work around ending state violence, ending police brutality, ending incarceration of folks touches the experiences of queer and trans folks, and we have to have folks in leadership who understand that, and we often have not had that. So that's important to me. I think what I often focus on is the ideological shifts that we need in society. So I do think we need to move into a space of understanding gender liberation as something that touches everyone's lives. There's kind of this false binary now of like trans versus cis that I don't think really will serve us in the long run. And I think we have to start understanding that the cis boys and men who are told they can't cry are dealing with the failures of gendered restrictions, right? And the cis women and girls who are dealing with being told they can't be strong, brilliant leaders of their own lives without being attached to some dusty old dude are dealing with the failures of gendered expectations. And of course, trans and non-binary folks and gender non-conforming folks, I think, provide an opportunity for everyone to kind of understand how all of those failures intersect. And so I want, cis folks to understand that when we're talking about trans liberation or gender liberation, it's something that will benefit them.
You talk about this in the book, and there's a line, I think I have it approximately, about that we are all gender non-conforming in one way or another, and that none of us will live up to the, quote, gender ideal. I'm curious, you've been on book tour, the book's been out. What have been some of the responses to that message as you've shared that?
Well, I think I also want folks to embrace being a failure. I think that is a beautiful thing, and so you're failing at gender norms and expectations, whether you realize it or not. I think there's been light bulbs that have gone off for different folks around that. I just think that it's often interesting to me that there are so many cis folks who think that trans and non-binary folks are going through it when, cis folks are going through it all the time. I think the difference is that we know that we're going through it because of the gender binary, but when I look out into the world and I see cis folks whining about who pays for what date and, who's valid, whether they make enough money or not, in the relationship, I see opportunities for them to understand that we need a radical shift in how we relate to each other in this society, because it's impacting every home. It's impacting love and people's potential for connection.
There's a question here. How do words and language support, and how do they oppress?
Ooh. Okay. Well, could you ask that one more time?
Yeah. I imagine there's a variety of ways to think about this and go at it, but how do words and language support, and how do they oppress?
I would say that when I think about the moments that I have, or some moments when I felt empowered, it's been finding words that articulated my experience. And I think, especially as someone who has constantly, been on the margins in different ways. Labels and language has been an opportunity for me to state the validity of my existence. And I think to also just own that sometimes people are right about, difference. And I mean that particularly when I think about being a kid who was often told, oh, you're gay or you're just like a girl or all these things. There was a way I was being seen as the other by peers. Now, I'm not saying like they could have been nicer about it, of course. But I think that understanding that I was being seen as different gave me an opportunity to kind of try and figure out, okay, well, what is that difference? Is what they're saying true? And I think when we fail is when we shut off conversation or we shut off nuance. And so I wonder what it would have been like to live in Augusta, Georgia, where young people knew that queer and trans people existed. And so that seeing difference wasn't a negative thing, but just kind of like air. It just was there, So I think it's nuanced. I do think that there's, of course, the oppressive piece, but I think having opportunities to articulate our experiences can give us the chance to come to new conclusions about who we actually are and who we want to be.
There's a somewhat related question, but it kind of zooms forward in time about you've worked at a lot of different places. You talk about a lot of those in the book. Are there ways in which different places you have worked have particularly supported you in ways that have been meaningful and valuable that you would encourage folks to replicate, things to pay attention to?
So in my first job as a newspaper reporter in Monroe, Georgia, somehow I found somewhere even smaller than my hometown. I had this editor, even though I didn't feel like I could be out as queer and trans in that space, I had this editor who, when I wrote this story about local drag performers, he really showed that he was affirming in some way because he reached out to apparently queer reporters that he knew to make sure we were getting all of the information correct. So that was one of those little glimmers in that time period that I was like, okay, maybe things are changing. And this was back in 2013. In my next job, I had different bosses who encouraged me to be more outspoken about my trans experience, particularly after the unfortunate suicide of Leila Alcorn. And I feel very indebted to them because that was a moment that completely shifted what I thought was possible with media in terms of speaking truthfully about experiences on the margins and elevating folks who we've lost in a different way. So I would say those are some examples for sure.
You've been active in a variety of different movements. Obviously we're talking a lot tonight about transgender rights, LGBTQ movement, but you've also obviously been very connected with women's liberation and Black liberation. This is sort of a huge question, but I am wondering if there are different things.
Another huge question.
Yeah,
Tane.
well, look at where we are. Are there different things that you've learned in those different spaces that have, been unique to those, but have helped you sort of piece it together in a bigger way?
It's interesting I guess what I say I've most gleaned from my experience in LGBTQ plus movement is how important knowing that people like you existed before is to feeling empowered. And I think that that's particular to LGBTQ plus movement because, of course, I knew, in women and feminist spaces that women existed throughout history, like across the board, particularly cis women. And I think in Black movement, of course, I knew that Black folks existed, but I think knowing that queer and trans folks existed shifted things for me. Because even before this current moment of politicians trying to stop curricula that already doesn't say much about queer and trans people, we weren't learning about queer and trans people in schools generally. So, I think I learned about the Stonewall riots reading a Wikipedia article, in high school. And how sad it is that it took that for me to learn that information. But even when I was reading that article in the late 2000s, I don't know that there was a specific articulation about trans folks having existed or gender nonconforming folks. So yeah, I think that piece is there. In Black movement, that is the movement that Black liberation movements are the movements that I've most built a resolve to be completely invested in dismantling systems of oppression. I would not be an abolitionist without Black, queer, and trans folks in Atlanta. I would not be someone interested in how we can dismantle how harmful capitalism is without Black liberation movements. I would not be someone who believed in decriminalizing sex work. Black liberation movements are the ones that have most radicalized me. And, feminist movements, child. Feminist movements. But it's been Black feminism specifically, right, which is at the intersection of Black liberation movements and feminism that we know there are multiple feminisms, right? But that has most fueled me, particularly in terms of self-expression and creativity. So that is a long answer because that was a big question.
I know. I'm gonna bring it way back down to earth. I've got a question here.
Okay.
Someone asked, who was a person in your early life who helped and nurtured you on your journey as a trans woman?
Nobody. That's not. I'm not trying to be shady at all, but there wasn't language to really understand transness and gender nonconformity that was accessible to me in my earliest years. So no one. I think that unfortunately continues to be true for a lot of folks. Like, our society doesn't equip most adults or parents or guardians to understand gender nonconformity or queerness or just difference.
And there's a great follow-up question here then that asks, what would full queer liberation look like to you?
It would look like people having the health care, the housing, the education, the vocations that they desire. It would look like a gender neutral or gender full society, however you want to look at it. And kids just being able to be the drivers of their destiny without holding the baggage of moldy old adults. And it would look like us really figuring out how to understand the expansiveness of love and intimacy and security and warmth.
That's beautiful. You're right. This question says, your writing's incredibly vulnerable. How do you decide what you are going to share and what you need to keep to yourself?
Jeez.
People are, when they write them on the cards, yeah, they're very smart people. Yeah.
Coming off of a memoir, it's like, I should have kept that. No, I'm just kidding. Well, what I learned about vulnerability was figuring out what parts of a story are mine to be vulnerable about and what parts are for someone else to be vulnerable about. So I had a lot of conversations with ex-partners and also with family about the things that I was writing because accountability really mattered to me. There are some memoirs who are like, you know, there's this one quote, and I'm blanking on the person's name, but they're like, if somebody wanted you to write well of them, they should have treated you better. And I get it, but I think one of the things that's been important for me is figuring out what's mine to tell and what isn't. And there are multiple parts to every story. I think also having a platform means that I have to be very particular about not putting other folks in harm's way who don't have a certain platform to insulate themselves from potential harm. And I also didn't want to write with revenge in mind, because it can be very tempting to do that with a platform. So I'm very grateful to the therapist I picked up along the way that I was able to actually move into deeper spaces in my relationships through this process, instead of widening existing gaps.
Was it harder to write about these things or have the conversations with people about what you were going to write about?
It was harder to have the conversations, for sure.
And not that everyone's going to write a memoir, but I feel like that practice of going and speaking to people about things that really matter is something that we could probably all benefit from doing. Do you have any advice on how you went about that and what the rest of us could try?
Sure. Well, I have to credit my family, because I think even when I was coming out as gay at 14, there was this kind of sense of a duty to be brave enough to tell my family before I told the world. There was something there about loyalty that I felt, and I don't know if that's like, you know, Black Southern family thing or what, but that's what I felt. And I think also with The Risk It Takes to Bloom, I didn't find the power in telling stories about experiences with folks without being brave enough to talk to them about it first. So that's a thing. And then the other thing I love to encourage folks to do, especially if you're a writer, is figure out how to write your story for yourself. I mean, whether it gets published or not. There were a couple of chapters that I had written years ago that I didn't know would be chapters, but I was able to process through that writing, and then later on it was like, oh, okay, I'm good now. I can share this piece here.
You've talked multiple times about growing up in the South. We're very happy to have you here, either in the Midwest or the North, depending on the branding that you use. And I'm curious, like, I think that there's probably something similar where, you know, a lot of energy and a lot of attention and focus sometimes, like, gets put in some very particular places in the country, right? Like, East Coast, West Coast, like New York or LA, San Francisco, these kinds of places. And part of your story is a journey of, you know, exploring those places, but then kind of coming home in a lot of ways and finding a lot of what you were looking for at home. I'm wondering if, over the course of, you know, the work that you've done, the book that you've written, your way of thinking about place has changed.
So this week is interesting because I did all of the Georgia tour dates this week. So I went to Atlanta, to Athens, and then last night I was in Augusta, Georgia, my hometown. And it was like a very healing, cathartic experience to just go home and be this truer version of myself, which is definitely not a version I would have imagined when I left that could exist in that space and also be cherished in that space. But when I think about the South in particular, I think the South gets a lot of heat for its history, of course, in terms of enslavement, of course, in terms of just, you know, the Civil War and so much more. And I think in a way we often just kind of define the South purely by oppression. And I think that that's a disservice to the folks on the margins who have reclaimed it and who have resisted and been resilient for generations. I mean, it was in Atlanta, like I said, where I completely transformed because there were people who were freedom fighters there, like present day. Because freedom fighters exist in every era. You know, I know we love to have our one or two that we talk about a lot, and white liberals love one in particular. No shade to MLK. But freedom fighters exist in every era, and we're called to be able to see them, to be able to witness them, to be able to hear them. And it's not easy because you don't have history books telling you, right, or indoctrinating you with things, right? But when I think about now and I think about the Black folks and our comrades who were on the front lines, of course, in 2020 and beyond, those are our freedom fighters. When I think about the folks who are sacrificing or risking a lot right now to be outspoken about the fact that we need to free Palestine, those are our freedom fighters right now. When I think about the Jewish folks who are saying not in our names and who are refusing to have their trauma and their pain weaponized to create more trauma and more pain. Those are our freedom fighters right now. And so I think it's important for us to be able to embrace nuance, embrace critical thought, embrace and understand how we often haven't been able to rely on states around the world or even our media ecosystem. Yes, I'm calling out the New York Times for failing on a lot of fronts. We often, particularly as folks on the margins and folks who care about folks on the margins, have not been able to trust the powers that be as storytellers and accurate storytellers. And that's important for us to remember.
So last question, which is sort of a call to action question. This person asked, what's one thing that you would recommend we do to help our neighbors and communities and be more supportive of trans people in particular?
I think listening to trans folks is a good start. And multiple trans folks, because like you said, we don't all have the same experience or the same perspectives. I think it's about elevating trans-led initiatives and organizers and activists, particularly who are moving work to alleviate the conditions that our folks are experiencing. I think it's about understanding, again, that you're having a gender experience too, honey. It's not just trans and non-binary folks. And that you won't really believe that you can be free until you understand that we deserve to be free too.
On that note, can you all do a big round of applause? Raquel Willis. The book is The Risk It Takes to Bloom on Life and Liberation. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for speaking at the Westminster Town Hall Forum.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for being here tonight. Thank you for being part of the Westminster Town Hall Forum tonight. If you are here in the sanctuary, please, Ms. Willis is going to be signing books right outside. I can attest personally, it is a wonderful book. Copies are for sale, and you can get in line, and she will sign them. We are going to have Breads and Spreads, a wonderful public reception in Westminster Hall out here, and we will have continuing the conversation in the rec room. If you'd like to meet with some folks and continue this conversation, talk in some small groups about what you heard today, we invite you to that. But for now, thank you all so much for being here. We appreciate every single one of you, and we'll hopefully see you again next time at the Westminster Town Hall Forum.
Okay.
You were fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Yes, of course.
That was wonderful. Yeah.